Welcome back to another episode of Manufacturing Tomorrow's Workforce. I'm Amanda Del Buno, and today's pod will feature Christine LaFave Grace's interview with Sheryl Thompson, CEO and founder of CADIA, the Center for Automotive Diversity, Inclusion, and Enhancement. In this interview, Christine and Sheryl discuss the new CADIA 2.0, diversity, inclusion, and much more. Here's their interview.
Sheryl Thompson spent 30 years working at Ford Motor Company. She started in 1986 as a dishwasher and steadily worked her way up at the company through multiple tooling and engineering roles. Thompson earned a Bachelor of Science in Manufacturing and her MBA along the way, and eventually became a global prototype manager at Ford. In 2018, she founded CADIA, the Center for Automotive Diversity, Inclusion, and Advancement, a not-for-profit organization with a focus on advancing women into more leadership roles at automotive companies and supporting the industry's next generation of decision-makers. In 2019, Thompson, a 2019 Influential Women in Manufacturing honoree, made CADIA her full-time focus, and in November, the organization announced the launch of CADIA 2.0, with an expanded focus encompassing development of all diverse talent in the industry. CADIA 2.0's mission is to double the number of diverse leaders in the automotive industry by 2030. Sheryl, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Christine. Very excited to be here and have the opportunity to talk about CADIA.
And congratulations on the launch. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit of the backstory of CADIA 2.0. What spurred the decision to deliberately look to make an inclusivity-focused organization even more inclusive?
Yes. Well, for one, the name inclusion is in our name. Right. So that was one reason. We started off with women, and we started to see that women were running up against some obstacles in that talent systems are not necessarily set up to support the full diversity, and often we're talking to each other. So lots has been done with women's leadership, training and development for women, all kinds of affinity groups, but often we're just in the room talking to ourselves. So we have to bring leaders into the mix. So that was the big reason. The other thing is other dimensions of diversity or underrepresented talent began to approach us with the same concerns that women were facing. Often they don't feel like they belong. They were experiencing some unconscious bias, had similar issues such as lack of access to the mainstream networks that often get us ahead. So for all of those reasons, we decided to sit down and really take a look and come up with a strategy. So I call it the 3 C's. We're looking at how do we champion diverse talent, how do we drive systemic change, and how do we support the leadership commitment? Because we don't want to leave the leaders out either. They're the ones that make the decisions, hold the influence, have the money, and who are helping others come along that career ladder.
Right. When you mention unconscious bias, that's something that we hear more and more about lately. And for me, I think about the example of just because you don't see something or you haven't experienced it yourself doesn't mean it's not a real phenomenon. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you define unconscious bias and how it maybe crops up in the automotive industry?
Well, sure. I think you described it perfectly. And boy, I have my own unconscious bias, and we're all constantly learning. And I think the important thing about bias is to remember is we can't blame or shame because we see the world with our perspective. We have our networks that we're comfortable with, but we have to begin to open up and look outside of ourselves and accept there may be a different way. There may be some value in engaging and bringing people in to your network who are different than you. And I've made mistakes myself and have had my own biases and have had to check myself. I think the reason it's such a challenge in our industry in automotive and manufacturing is because it has been so male-dominated for such a long time, especially in the leadership positions. You know, the higher up the pipeline you go, the more and more that exists. And I think it's a great, exciting time. People are starting to realize that there may be another perspective to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and then on the other hand, too, what do you say to those skeptics who might say, well, why does it matter? You know, the people who'd say, I don't care if you're a man, woman, black, white, green, purple, whatever. As long as you can do the job, you're good with me. So why are people trying to put arbitrary numbers or targets on this kind of thing?
Wow, that's a good question. So many reasons. First of all, we all have a different starting point. It is not a level playing field. We all have access to different opportunities, different networks. There's the idea of privilege, and there's a really fun exercise that is often done in many diversity and inclusion trainings or even unconscious bias trainings. It's called the privilege walk, where the facilitator will have everybody stand on a line, and you get to take a step forward or a step back depending on what the question is. So an example is, you know, if you were born in the United States, take a step forward. If you have ever been concerned about calling the police when there's trouble, take a step back. And so, you know, at the end of the game, you're either way out in front or you're way in the back. And that really speaks to all of us having a different starting point. So that's one reason. And then, you know, you look at where the demographics are going. There's so many trends that are all coming together to make this really a business imperative. So you look at demographics, and next year in 2020, 50.2% of the population under the age of 18 is going to come from an ethnic or minority race, ethnic group or minority race. So if we want to have companies with good talent and to be able to attract and retain that talent, we're going to have to consider how do we make our workplaces more diverse and inclusive. And then the other thing I would comment on, if you look at a homogeneous workforce, they're often all kind of that groupthink could be going on. They're all right, thinking the same way. We've always done it this way. They haven't had that first perspective. But when you bring in diversity, whether it is diversity of race, gender, nationality, ethnic group, sexual orientation, background, perspective, education, so many more ideas come to the table. So you get so much better at problem solving, you're more creative, you're more innovative, so it's better for business.
Oh, it gets to that idea of you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know what could be brought to the table, what could be made even better, more robust, more efficient, more creative, if you don't have those different perspectives based on different experiences at the table. Right.
And the buying population, you know, that's the other thing. The buying population is very diverse, and it's really never looked more different than the workforce in our industry, especially, like I said, as you get up the pipeline.
So in light of all this, what does it mean to be a diversity champion today?
What does it mean to be a diversity champion? Well, it means ensuring that there is equal opportunity for all. So sometimes as a leader, you tend to rely on your one or two top people or people that you're comfortable with. So being a diverse or an inclusive leader would mean ensuring there's opportunity equally for everybody on your team. That would be one thing I would call out. The other thing is always questioning why. If somebody isn't comfortable stepping up and taking an opportunity, what's behind that? Is there a lack of confidence? Is it that they feel they don't belong? So really stepping out, looking outside of yourself and seeing how you can help and pull another person along.
That's great. Can you tell me a little bit then about what diversity and inclusion looks like in the automotive industry today as you see it? You know, it seems like people can point to GM CEO Mary Barra and say, hey, industry's making strides. We have a woman leading one of the top automotive companies in the world. You can't say that we're not working on this. What opportunities, though, do you still see?
Yeah, I would say GM is a great example, and they've been really working at it for a long time. Mary Barra started as a co-op, so she has been well-developed and has had a career path with really good assignments to prepare her for the position she has today. And with her at the head, she understands that she needs to ask those really important questions on if there's not a diverse slate of candidates for an opportunity, she gets to ask and say, why not? And go back and develop a plan so that in 3 or 4 years, we have a diverse slate of candidates for this opportunity. So they've been at it for a while, and I think with the OEMs, Ford, FCA, Toyota, all of the OEMs, they're customer-facing. So it's a little bit easier for them to make this a priority because their workforce, their leadership, their boards have to reflect the buying population. Where it gets a little bit more challenging is the tier 1s, the tier 2s, the machine tool builders, right? They're not customer facing. So some of them, haven't quite gotten there as far as making it a priority, but they're starting to because of all the reasons we've been talking about before, being able to attract a diverse talent base and to retain that talent base for all the good reasons, the productivity, the innovation, the creativity. So there's a bigger business imperative now. And companies are, the leadership of the companies is more transparent because a prospective employee can look all of that up online and see who's on the board. They can see who's on the leadership team. So much more awareness and transparency than before.
Yeah, and talking about the tier 1 and the tier 2, that's so interesting and so important. I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to attend a supplier diversity and inclusion fair at Navistar, where Navistar, which is based in suburban Chicago, showcased all of the diverse suppliers they have, whether that's women-owned businesses, minority-owned enterprises, small businesses, veteran-owned businesses. It was a really unique opportunity to bring all of those folks, all those suppliers in and have a chance for them to, number one, network, and number two, it's a really visible example of then Navistar's commitment to diversity, not just at the corporate level, but throughout the supply chain. It's interesting to see more companies recognizing the value of that. What else would you say supports diversity and inclusion, in the manufacturing industry? Those best practices of, like you referenced Mary Barra saying, okay, well, I don't have a diverse slate of candidates here. Why is that?
Yeah, I would say some best practices are more and more companies are starting to put somebody in charge of diversity and inclusion. Other companies will say, it's going to happen organically. But I think it has to be taken as serious as any other metric you're trying to improve, like quality, safety, cost, delivery, launches. There has to be some metrics in it, and it has to be just as important as anything else. So I think putting somebody in charge of diversity and inclusion is the best practice. Having a diversity council at the executive level and then at the regional level, that would be another one wherein the executive team is setting strategy and then the regional diversity councils are kind of ambassadors or implementing or executing. Employee resource groups, I think that's an excellent strategy because not only does it give people who may feel like they don't belong a sense of belonging, those groups often help educate other groups and serve as bridges, and they reach into the community and that's another thing that helps with attracting diverse talent. So those are three that come to mind off the bat.
Yeah, all about fostering those connections. Well, can you tell me a little bit about CADIA's work and some of your goals heading into 2020?
Yeah, so we are really excited to be launching into 2020 with, in fact, next week, we're holding a diversity and inclusion roundtable where we have 15 different companies attending, coming together to share best practices, what's working, what's not working. We're also working on enrolling companies into our membership, which gives them all of the benefits of many of the things we've been describing. We work with them to assess where are they relative to best practices. That includes the roundtable, and then we offer individuals professional development in terms of career advancement or learning how to be a more inclusive leader for those who are already in leadership positions. We have a Rev Up conference coming up in April. We're partnering with Society of Automotive Engineers at their World Congress event. So we're really excited about that. We've had 2 CADIA events so far. We call them Rev Up 2030 because that goal of doubling the number of diverse leaders by 2030. So that's kind of been the signature name. So that's coming up, and just lots of exciting partnerships. We're not out there to compete with organizations that are doing great work already. We're really there to partner with them and fill a gap when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
That's awesome. That's incredible. You know, as a lot of companies are looking into 2020 and looking at their plans and goals and how they're going to drive their mission, diversity and inclusion and looking at metrics there and advancing some priorities there, it might seem like the kind of thing, you know, different competing priorities can get lost in the shuffle, or there's always something that needs attention today will take precedence today over developing a strategic plan of action around something. What do you see as risks for companies throughout the supply chain that don't make diversity and inclusion a priority?
Well, I would say the risk is the ability to attract and, more importantly, retain talent. It certainly costs a lot of money to bring on a new employee, and you invest in that employee, and to have them leave because they're not feeling welcomed or valued or listened to or heard can really hurt, you know, once you've invested all that money. So I would say that that's a big risk. Not being productive would be another risk. There's a lot of productivity hits if workforce is not working in an environment that everybody feels valued and welcomed. Yeah, I would say those are the main two. The ability to attract and retain talent.
Right. And finally, to close out our conversation today, what is the CEO Inclusion Pledge that you recently signed, and why was it important to you to sign it?
Yeah, thank you for asking about that. It is the PricewaterhouseCoopers put out a Diversity and Inclusion CEO Pledge, and I had just heard about it a couple of months ago and looked into it and found over 800 CEOs had signed it. To demonstrate their commitment to advancing diversity and inclusion within their companies and to generate and foster an environment that is inclusive. So when I looked into it, I found that there were 13 different automotive companies who had signed, and I thought, wow, we're out there supporting automotive companies in diversity and inclusion. We should certainly look into this. And a lot of really good resources. There's a network group for people who are signed up with the pledge. You can share information, and they have all kinds of resources available, tips for engaging with your employees, with your teams, with your board. So it's great work that they're doing, and really proud and happy to be a part of it.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, congratulations on several different initiatives that are exciting. Lots of things going on right now. So, Sheryl, I want to say thank you again so much for your time today, for joining me this afternoon. For Manufacturing Tomorrow's Workforce, I'm Christine LaFave Grace. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.
That was Christine's interview with Sheryl Thompson. Before we close out today's show, I wanted to take a quick moment to invite our listeners to follow the new Manufacturing Tomorrow's Workforce LinkedIn group, where we're continuing the conversation about the manufacturing workforce of tomorrow. One more quick note is that this is the last podcast of our first season. Our next episode, the first of Season 2, will launch Wednesday, January 15th. Until then, as always, thanks for listening and have a great rest of your day.